We're going to talk this evening all about designing an agile test automation strategy in 2023. Okay, so we're really boiling this down to three areas. Okay, we've seen the agenda, but if we think about that at a slightly higher level, okay, we're looking at really the intent, the scope, and the risk side of things when it comes to your automated testing. All right, so we'll talk about a little bit about purpose. What is the express intention of this? Why are you trying to do this? What's the bigger picture? What's the end result that we're looking for as an organisation? And then we'll focus a little bit about what you should and what you definitely shouldn't be looking to automate as part of that process. Okay. A really important part of doing that is understanding severity, criticality of your existing tests. Either you're working with a series of manual test packs that you already have, or of course you're looking at the creation of new tests for future functionality that's coming down the line. But we'll understand about how we can use risk scoring in order to do that. Okay, and then we start to consider the planning and executing side of your automation strategy. So we'll definitely be talking about just at a high level, not a technical level at this stage, but talking about test frameworks, data, environment considerations, and your test team, right? The makeup of your current testing team, people, resources, with skill sets that you have at your disposal. Okay, we can't forget about that, of course. And we'll talk about the automation pyramid. Right, so this is really about understanding our ratio of different types of automated tests that coming together give us our entire strategy. Right, it's understanding the focus of each of those layers, who has ownership of them, and the purpose that they serve, right, and why we should have this kind of scaling numbers of tests in each of these layers. We'll look at CICD pipelines. We'll briefly talk about what's perceived to be the top 5 CICD tools in 2023. Something that may help you investigate further when you decide how you want to go ahead and implement this. And of course, on the execution side, this is all meaningless without good quality reporting. Okay. When we talk about reporting, really from our point of view, as far as being agile, we're talking about real-time reporting, getting access to results quickly, not waiting hours. And then the idea of traceability, right? So how can we link that reporting back to your source requirements? How can we provide transparency of our test coverage? How can we show what's been tested and to what extent, with data iterations and repetition, etc. So you need a quality reporting platform to help you do that. And then finally, I think our final category is inspecting and adapting. Okay, how do we go again? How do we repeat and improve, sharpening the axe? Okay, so once you've got your first suite, your first regression pack of automated tests, if we talk about UI tests and API tests for now. Once you get into the cycle of running them through your CI/CD pipeline, you're going to find failures, of course, right? So what does the troubleshooting and the maintenance process look for these automated test packs that you've spent so many hours creating, right? They've got to serve their purpose. They have a job to do. How do we keep everything running smoothly? All right. And then when we start to consider return on investment from an organization in its testing practice, in its team, all right, how can we get more return from just essentially a series of functional automated tests? How can we look to do more with that? To continually add to this application quality profile? How can we extend our testing to learn more and more about the application, all with this express intent of working with developers to improve the quality of the application on a particular project within your organization? Okay, and finally, how does all of this contribute to the upskilling of your test team? Okay, so this is really important. All right, so this is what we're going to cover for the rest of the session. Right, welcome back. Let's start by diving into our purpose. Okay, there are many valid reasons why you are looking to become more agile, why you're looking to embrace an agile approach, incorporating high levels of automation testing. All right, so certainly enabling testers to spend more time doing exploratory testing. Okay, whilst that's not directly linked to automated testing, this is one of the most profound benefits you can have, right? If you've got a good level of automated testing, like your security net, if you like, then your testers, your human beings, can go away and spend considerably more time doing real high value exploratory testing, looking for edge cases. Okay, we certainly want to start removing this tedious manual cycles of testing, things that have to be done on every single build to an environment, but may be time consuming. That's not something you want your testers to be doing when they could be doing higher value testing. Okay. As a general rule, your organization may have aspirations of moving towards an agile way of working. All right. So that has to, by definition, embrace an agile approach to automate testing and high volumes of that. Okay. If you're looking to start embarking upon kind of extended non-functional testing coverage, right? So if you need to start testing on more operating systems, more browsers, more devices, or you do want to start looking at parallel testing to start speeding up your run cycles, again, good reason for looking at agile test automation. By definition, really, you should absolutely be looking at a solid reporting platform, right? And what that's then going to give you is, enhanced testing traceability, transparency of your testing coverage, and then meaningful reporting, right? So we move away this concept of, okay, I've got 500 tests and 450 of those have passed and 50 of those have failed. That really adds very, very little value now to your stakeholders, to your delivery managers, to your development team. As testers, we have to do a better job of that. Now, our traceability to requirements, our transparency of coverage, and the frequency and the speed with which we can provide that reporting is a significant value add and a good reason for why you would want to embrace automated testing. If we are stuck in this manual testing cycle, it's often said that testing becomes the bottleneck. We want to stop that from being an issue, right? And agile test automation will allow that very much to be the case if you implement it properly. It's a great vehicle for getting testers and developers collaborating more closely. We'll talk a little bit about that dynamic later, but certainly I'll make the point now that testers don't need to be dependent on developers for ownership of a coded test automation framework. Okay, they can stand on their own 2 feet. But as part of an agile organization, you do have an opportunity for devs and testers to work more closely together, collaborating on the automation effort. Okay, that may be working with one central tool. It could be a range of a couple of tools, but the overall effort can be owned and moved forward collaboratively. One thing agile automation will give you is continually increasing test coverage. Okay, now that's not to say you end up running everything all of the time, but increasing coverage from a testing point of view, of course, is no bad thing, and it's a natural byproduct of an agile automation process, especially working in sprints, where testers are part of the backlog planning, the sprint planning, the backlog prioritization, the discovery sessions for requirements. Okay, so this idea of shifting testing left, which we'll talk about, this is going to lead to a natural increase in regression testing coverage, and how we choose to run that is up to us down the line, but you will always have this increasing suite and plenty of test coverage to choose from for a variety of different reasons, whether you're driving that through functional choice or risk-based choice, running a subset of critical tests, for example, but coverage is good. As we say there, then, the ability to run subsets, either based on severity, criticality, or functionality-driven tests. So let's say, you have an e-commerce application and there's been a change to the checkout flow involving just the PayPal payment integration, for example. So you may have some tests that are both tagged. Well, it could be a number of things that could relate to critical functionality because it's payment related. It may be tagged with PayPal as a method of choice. It may be tagged with payment. It may be tagged with checkout. And there's no limit to how you do this, but in order, when you do have this, you can then run these subsets of tests for a very particular reason, okay, which further kind of draws efficiency in your execution process. And of course, the fundamental thing really with agile automated regression testing is the need and the ability to test multiple builds of code, potentially to multiple environments, potentially multiple times a day. Okay, so long gone should be this this idea that you have a testing bottleneck because you've got a 4-day manual cycle of testing to do in a single environment, using up 5 or 6 testers. That's the kind of thing we want to be leaving behind. And this is, these are all very, very common reasons that we've just covered here as to why you would want to move to or start embracing agile testing automation. Okay. Fundamentally, though, the number one thing, all right, ensuring your testing practice, your team, if you're the leader of that practice, you as an individual, you collectively are doing your best job of keeping your stakeholders up to date, by the hour, if needs be, about the quality of those applications, right? Your job is to provide fastest feedback about continuous quality of the applications under test. Okay. So let's start thinking about what we do and don't want to automate. I think it can be a misconception that just because you nail your approach to automation that we just start automating everything. That's not the case. Absolutely not the case. If you're familiar with your ISTQB testing accreditations, one of the things very, very early on it talks about is these 7 testing principles. All right, so let's focus on 3 of those. Okay, exhaustive testing is impossible, and I've added there ill-advised, even trying to test exhaustively, right? Just because automation makes it easier, and of course it does. When you can run automated tests continuously, repeatedly, with increasing coverage, with increased data-driving data permutations, just because you can do all that stuff, it doesn't mean you should try and do that, right? You don't want to replace a 4-day manual testing cycle with a 12-hour automated testing cycle. You'll have significant coverage, but it's still going to take too long. And the value add of doing that is probably highly questionable. Okay, right, the second one, so defect clustering. So this is just thinking about code complexity, right? So we can still be smart where we choose to spend the majority of our time, or where we kind of really zone in on increasing coverage for our automated tests in particular complex areas of code, or areas of severity, criticality. So yes, payment integrations, anything to do with customer management, that kind of thing. So that's always a worthwhile principle to think about, in terms of where you're choosing to spend your time creating these tests. Talk to your developers, understand the risk areas, the complex areas of code, and put more focus into test coverage in those areas. All right, and then our kind of third principle we'll talk about here of the 7, making it context dependent. All right, so what do I mean? I mean test the application like a user. All right, we still need to drive the application like a user is going to use it in the real world. Okay, we'll talk about the pyramid down the line, but that advocates a high level of API testing. Okay, but that's how the front end is going to call the back end. That's not how your users are going to use the application. So whilst we have to have both, we've got to do a good amount of end-to-end testing through the UI in the way that 80% of our users are going to use the application. All right, let's use Pareto's principle there, the 80-20 rule. And that's definitely a way in which that's going to help you, draw efficiencies and be effective with your agile process. All right, so things definitely not to automate. All right, anything that you only need to test once and once only, single-use tests, no, not worth the effort. If you need to test something immediately, if something's just gone into an environment and it needs an immediate response to let the developers know that that's been successful, well, test it manually to start with, right? Explore it, test it. You've probably got a result within 30 seconds or a couple of minutes, okay? that there and then is the best use of your time. Maybe you can turn that automated test around in 20 minutes. However, still coming back to this principle of fastest feedback, which of those two approaches in that circumstance is going to give you, the fastest approach. So yeah, something that needs immediate testing, come back to your automation later on. Two things here really interconnected. So tests without predictable results. So things that are very changeable and maybe need a kind of a human overview to make a objective decision on the outcome. But also tests where you don't have full control of the inputs, okay? Testing fundamentally has to be about having control, absolute control of the inputs or the starting state, the setup of the application or the journey for the test, as well as the ability to verify the outcome. Now, whether you're doing that in the UI, in a mobile app, whether you're doing something through the API, those are the two fundamental things: control of the inputs and the ability to verify the output. That's what your testing process is all about. So where you don't have those predictable results, or where you are unable to control the inputs in the way that you would like to, then those are probably not good candidates for automation. Things that you would look to, first and foremost, exploratory test. Okay, by their very nature, exploratory testing suggests there is no scripted approach to that. Okay, you're going to go off the beaten track, you're going to explore. No two exploratory testing sessions should ever be the same, okay, because it's unscripted. You're going with your gut feel. It's heuristic in nature, okay? So you definitely shouldn't be looking to automate a previous exploratory test, okay? Tests that rely on the outcome of other tests. What we mean here is, successful test automation is going to rely on test independence, okay? Tests need to run independently of each other and should never be entirely dependent on the result of a previous test. Okay, they need to pass or fail on their own merit. Tests that don't tell you anything you don't already know. Okay, so this is back to that point. Let's not just continue adding more and more tests for the express purpose of bulking up the numbers. Fool's economy there. It needs to add value. It needs to tell us something we don't already know about the quality of the application. If it does that, by all means, add it as a test. If it doesn't, discard it. We should probably look to avoid minimal impact UI bugs. Okay, so things that may have, things that were a bug, they were a problem, someone found them, it was fixed, it was deployed to the environment, tested, probably passed. If it's of minimal impact and it's highly unlikely to reappear, then let's not automate it. Definitely not usability tests. That requires human effort, look, touch, feel, subjective assessment. Okay, so don't look to automate those. And I think here this is starting at basics, right? Tests that are not already well written as a manual testing case. Now, I guess this is probably most prevalent for if you already have a manual testing pack, of course, and probably the first thing you're looking to do is convert that to an automation pack. Well, the start point for that is to make sure that all of those manual tests are fit for purpose, they're complete, they've been recently run, they've returned a clear result the last time they were run. I think if they fit those categories, then yes, you should look to embrace it. And then conversely, things you should be focusing on, right? So high priorities for automation, starting here, right? Your high risk, your business critical functions in areas of code complexity, right? Complex areas of code. This is where you're going to want to start and prioritize your focus. You should definitely then look to run those to kind of satisfy your non-functional requirements. So starting looking at different browsers, different devices, if you've got mobile browser or mobile app to think about. Okay, so they are definitely candidates for automation, of course. You're running the same functional test but in a different way, but it still tells you about a different type of quality. Okay, tests that you need to execute on every single build in every environment. That's not something you want to do manually. So yeah, definitely look to automate those. And from an effort point of view, from a team utilization point of view, tests have historically taken a long time to set up They've taken a long time to run, they're slow, they're tedious manual tests. But again, you need to do them consistently. These are the types of tests you should be automating. And then I think finally, tests where you do want a good level of data driving with data iteration, different examples. Like a checkout flow, right? If you're on the Amazon website, the number of permutations you could make to test the overall checkout flow. So you could be different types of user, you could be registered user, a guest user, you can search for different types of products, different categories, different category landing pages, different product detail pages. You're going to have different billing addresses, you're going to have different payment methods, all this kind of stuff. So that could essentially be one flow with the ability to data drive in many different ways. Now, if that's what you need to do to prove out a particular flow, again, you don't have to do that with everything, but in a test like that example where data iteration is going to be important, then this is absolutely a good candidate for automation. Okay. And then let's just think about ultimate aspirations, right? It's you can expect to get towards kind of 70-80% automation, right? In a mature agile organization, that kind of ratio of automation to manual is commonplace, right? And you can shoot for that. That can be your aspiration, as long as it's still being risk-based and is no more than strictly necessary. Okay, so that should be the goal of what we're trying to do here. So let's talk about risk scoring. So we've mentioned that now, and it's probably worth spending some time understanding what we mean by this. Okay, so defining your critical test packs or subsets of tests with risk scoring. All right, so essentially, simply put, risk is probability multiplied by impact. All right, there's different ways you can do this. You can kind of have a 1 to 5 scaling system. You can just do 1 to 3, kind of low, medium, high type of basis. But you've got to look at each of those. So if you look at a new feature that the product owner wants to introduce, okay, you're going to want to score that from both a probability and an impact perspective. Okay, so if we start to think about probability, right, and this is going to start to help us gauge whether it should be low, medium, or high scoring on the probability side of things, right? So is it especially complex? Okay, were the requirements well drafted? Is this a brand new feature, or is it an iteration of something that already exists? And has it failed before? Okay, that could well mean it's more likely to again to fail in the future. If it's going through lots of cycles of refactoring as we iterate and we develop that feature, that's likely, there's a higher probability that we may find bugs there. Are we using a proven development team? Is it an in-house team that we've worked with for many years? Have we started outsourcing stuff recently to another supplier? This is something that may make increasingly likely that you could find a bug in this particular feature. Are we using any new or unproven technologies? Again, it stands to reason that we may find issues with that. And are we, as is obviously commonplace nowadays, what is our use of third-party integrations in connection with this feature? All of these things can start to give you a feel of, okay, am I going to score this low, medium, or high from a probability perspective? Okay, which then leads me on to my impact. Okay, if that was probability or likelihood, impact is all about, if this does get into live, how big a problem is this really going to be? And again, there are different ways of grading this. Okay, so if a problem were to make it into production, which are the customers that are affected? Are these internal business users or are these external customers? Now, of course, that's going to depend on the nature of your business, but also your applications, right? Now, it could be both, okay, which is the kind of worst case scenario. From a very high level business point of view, what's this going to do to the brand if this particular feature fails? If there's a big marketing campaign around this, there's a big launch, it's a highly anticipated feature that people have been waiting for some time, and this fails, right? What's that going to do to brand? What's that then going to lead on to in terms of revenue? Is that going to have a big impact on revenue? Okay. Again, depending on the industry you're in, you could well find yourself, no longer being in compliance with certain legal regards that that you do need to be in compliance with. So some serious things to think about there that maybe we don't normally as testers, right? But if we start to broaden our horizons a little bit, you can see how this kind of scoring process helps you to assess focus. Okay, what other areas of our business would it impact? Okay, think about this one, right? If this goes to production, it fails. Is that going to lead to people switching away from our product, away from our brand, switching to a competitor? If they've normally been loyal to us, is this enough of a breaking feature that it makes it no longer viable that they're going to use your service or your application? That's the last thing you want. And then the short and long-term cost of fixing it, right? Associated as well with any particular workaround. Is there a workaround? Okay, these are all ways now that you can start to score your impact on a low, medium and high basis, right? And quite simply, you multiply. So let's say we give 1 for low, 2 for medium, 3 for high. You multiply your probability by your impact, and if you get 9, which is your 3 times 3, that is your highest scoring risk area where you're going to want to focus your testing as soon as you can. All right, so when we're creating these tests, again, let's focus on the highest risk areas first. And then once we've got those covered, we can then start to add in the lower scoring tests. When you're executing, you're going to want to prioritize those highest level, those highest severity tests to be executed first. Okay. So let's talk about frameworks, data and environments, and the team. Okay, so this isn't a deep dive into selection of an automation framework. Okay, but it just something to think about. All right, and your start point for that probably with choosing a solution is are you going to build or are you going to buy? Are you looking at open sourced or licensed products? Okay, now some of the questions below are going to help you to explore that. But probably first and foremost, what technologies does it need to support? As a testing team looking to embrace automation, what do you need to test? Now, the chances are almost certainly nowadays that you're going to have a web app to test. You're probably going to have some APIs to test, and certainly mobile browser as well. Potentially native apps, and maybe you've got some kind of legacy desktop applications as well. But the technologies that as a testing function you need to support are really going to drive. They're probably going to rule in certain products and they're going to rule out other products as well as a start point. Okay, and if you start to broaden the scope of the automation, all right, so we talk about non-functional testing as well. Are you looking to embrace accessibility, for example, auditing, by which we typically mean something like Lighthouse? Maybe security, maybe reusing your functional automated tests as the start of a load testing plan. Visual testing as well. Okay, so this is something that's gained a lot of focus, pardon the pun, a lot of traction in the last few years. Okay, with tools like Percy and Apply tools. It was always one of those areas that people never thought really possible for automation, but of course you can now. All right, so visual testing automation, again, particularly important for brands, big marketing releases, home pages, responsive design, look and feel from desktop to mobile. All right, so maybe you've got, that's now within the remit of your testing practice. You need to do that. And then you're going to want to think about budget and learning curve. Okay, so everything, you will have a budget as a team. No question. And every tool is going to come with a learning curve. So some of those will have maybe a slightly steeper learning curve to begin with, maybe some of the open source tools. But the payoff down the line is probably that it's a lower kind of total cost of investment in the tool itself. Versus an off-the-shelf SaaS-based product that you can probably get up and running with, within 10-15 minutes. But may have a higher cost of acquisition over the months and years. Okay, and then really, once you then start to build out your suite of tests, what does that maintenance cycle look like? Okay, and how comprehensive is your reporting? So, if you looked at nothing else, if you looked at these 6 or 7 different things, this would be a good place to start answering your own questions about how you're going to select an automation framework. Okay. So let's think about data environments as well. Okay, so when we talk about agile testing, automation, the ability to release many builds of code to different environments in a day, you're probably going to be dealing with 3 or 4 different environments, at the very least. Now you're going to want to work closely with your infra guys, right? Your developers. Initially, you're going to need some support to build those environments out, right? And then to have the CICD and the rebuild process stood up behind it. But as testers, you're going to want to manage those environments. You're going to want to deploy new features to those environments when you are ready to test them. Okay. So you're going to have to work with your infra guys to set that pipeline up. Okay. But I iterate, you as testers should own that deployment process to the testing environment, so you have a firm grip on exactly what's in any given environment at any point in time. Excuse me. So you know exactly what you're testing, in line with the intention of your sprint planning. Okay, and of course with the data side of things, with higher levels of testing, typically through automation, you're going to need to make sure you have sufficient production-like and sanitized data, okay, just to make sure your tests are running nicely. And it, of course, facilitates the coverage that you want. So again, thinking about e-commerce, have you got enough stock, essentially, products, inventory, numbers of products, content, product narrative, images for products, have you got a variety of test users, have you got some test payment methods you can use, of course. So you're going to need to think about all of that for your testing downstream. Okay, and then let's look at the team makeup. Now it's becoming increasingly common now that we're seeing a world in which developers and testers are collaborating increasingly together. That's a good thing. That certainly adds to the tester's skill set. It gives them more exposure to the kind of the inner workings of the application stack. So they can start to adopt a bit more of a glass box or a white box approach to testing, because they're getting familiar with certain parts of the code. That's a plus side. A potential downside is that you do lose some of this testing autonomy. It's still high value in having an independent testing team, still part of the organization, still part of an agile delivery team, but they have their own remit, their own way of working. So two different sides of the coin there. Ultimately, with agile automation, if you've got a team of manual testers so far, or you've predominantly hired people with a manual testing background until now, you're going to want to find people. You're going to want to invest in people that are willing to step up and start, thinking about this SDET, this software development engineering test. This is the most common kind of term for this type of role now. People have to be willing to grow, move with the times, embrace technology, and start saying, right, I've done manual to now, but now I'm going to take that next step up the ladder. You want to start constructing your team from people that are excited and willing to do that, and they're willing to take a lead role and start driving it forward. On to our final point, right? So you are going to want a natural lead within your team, within your testing practice, to help you drive this. And it's always good if you can kind of take a trainer type of approach. So someone leads, they then disseminate that knowledge to 3 or 4 senior testers in the practice, and then they start rolling that knowledge down the tree. And it's a very, very organic way of learning and getting people up to speed very, very quickly. All right, so definitely some things to think about there. When it comes to some of these tools, these are some kind of lower level specifics to think about. So, this is just to give you a flavour of some top tools on the market right now and what they do and don't offer. And, sometimes with these, you're going to be surprised. Okay, so, at least, 4 out of 6 there don't offer support for mobile app or native app automation. All right, some of them don't offer support for desktop apps. Okay, lots of people offering visual testing support now, not all, but most. We are seeing increasing focus on accessibility and lighthouse auditing. And it's ideal that if you can embrace that within your automation effort for reuse of your existing tests, then that's a very effective way of doing it. But again, not all tools are going to allow you to do that, okay? Almost everyone, of course, offering API testing support. Now, you could further subdivide that and say, well, is it purely REST services, or can I test SOAP services with that as well? Of course, the major focus nowadays on REST services, of course. But you still may have to test some SOAP services, so something to consider. With Test Evolve, okay, so we are firmly bought into the use of BDD with Cucumber. We really believe in the value of that. We know a lot of our customers do, and some tools will support that and some won't. So another consideration. Almost all tools, if they're not firmly code based, even if they are kind of capture and replay tools, there will be a situation that you're trying to automate a test for, in which you are going to need to add some code of your own. They tend to add it, call it snippets of code snippets, right? So when it comes to that, what languages are supported for you, right? Of course, most people are offering at least JavaScript today. Some don't, okay? And some SaaS products won't allow you the opportunity to do this at all. So that's important to think about. And okay, maybe you've got some other language experience in the team. So, do you need to be able to add code of your own as snippets to these automation tests? And would you have a particular language of preference that you'd want to do that in? It may be a minor consideration, but could be a consideration nonetheless. Almost all tools now have got a kind of a quick start web test recorder, and maybe a mobile app test recorder accelerator as well. Okay, and then if you think about the reporting side of things, how many of these tools are really only proprietary reporting mechanisms for their own frameworks? Are you looking for a centralized reporting platform that ultimately is going to be your one-stop shop for different types of test reporting as well, different types of payloads, different types of tools in your ecosystem? Okay. So we'll touch on the pyramid, the automation pyramid. So this was kind of first brought to market by a guy called Michael Cohn. And it's definitely stood the test of time. There are different versions of this now. But this, in simple terms, this is just a good, solid way of structuring ratios of automated tests at different layers of the stack in different volumes. All right, quite simply, as we said there, right, let's assume the devs have got a great level of unit test coverage for your application. So the pyramid says that your unit tests at the bottom, they should provide the base, the foundation, and they should be the most numerous in quantity. Okay. Above that, we look at our service layer, or our API tests, our REST tests. Okay. So you won't typically have as many API tests as you do unit tests, but you still want a good volume there, right? API tests are faster, they're more consistent, they're not brittle for the very fact they're not going through the UI, so you tend to find them not subject to performance flakiness, shall we say. And then at the top of the pyramid, you have your end-to-end, your UI automated tests. Okay. And really what we're saying here, if you nail that, if you get a good ratio of all of those, good coverage in all those areas, what it allows you to do at the very top of the pyramid is have your human beings, your testers, really spending some good quality time doing manual exploratory testing. Now, if you can bring that all together, you've got an awesome kind of approach to agile automation there. All right, so just focusing on your UI, certainly full user journeys. You're going to want to automate the testing of that through the UI. As we talked about earlier, cross-browser testing, cross-device testing through the user interface, of course. Visual testing, accessibility testing, lighthouse testing. These are all things that would need to be done through the UI if that's important to you as a team. If you're looking to do that as part of your automation cycle, these types of tests are going to be at the top of your pyramid in that UI layer. All right, we'll typically find that, of course, the developers are writing the unit tests. There may be some overlap, developers and testers together writing service layer tests. Could just be the testers. There may still be a fraction of overlap. Again, it's going to depend on the organization, the team makeup, and the approach in terms of who writes the UI tests. But typically speaking as well, this pyramid is going to suggest that developer effort is towards the bottom, and it becomes increasingly tester focused as it moves towards the top. Okay. Let's think about CICD pipelines. All right, let's talk about the basic flow. So really this is about getting frequent builds of new feature code into your live environment, right? Getting features to customers quickly. That's what makes you competitive. That's what your business and your product owners are looking for. All right. On the left here, courtesy of Catalan, we see a 2023 report on the top 5 current CICD tools. All right. So we talk about Jenkins, Team City, which is from JetBrains, Circle CI, Bamboo, and GitLab. All right. So these are probably things you're going to want to be thinking about to orchestrate your CI/CD pipeline. Definitely something to dig into more detail with your infra guys, with your developers, of course. There are going to be other perspectives on this, but of that, Jenkins is the only open source candidate there, right? The other are kind of paid or proprietary. It tells you a little bit about ease of setup, the kind of built-in features you may have, integrations, hosting, whether or not there's a free version, etc., etc. Things you're going to want to think about, but definitely kind of too much of a topic to cover in this one particular session. Certainly I can tell you that we work with Jenkins right now, and that works very, very well for us. Of course, it's a very popular tool. But yeah, from as far as that basic flow, this is the cycle we go through. Okay, so for a new feature, we start with a basic requirement from the business. All right, so we have some draft requirements. We go through a cycle of design, coding, building, releasing to a test environment. We test it. If that's gone well, we deploy to production. And we then enter support mode. Okay, and then rinse and repeat new features or iterations of features. Now your release cadence, as to how agile you are going to be as an organization, that could be hourly, right? It could certainly be daily. For some people right now, just trying to get to weekly or monthly would be an achievement. But nonetheless, this is the cycle. These are the stages that we go through. Okay, and regardless of that, good coverage, high quality, repeatable, consistent, rapid test automation has to be a huge part of that to make it a reality. All right, there's a fundamental part of what we're doing here, why we're talking about agile testing automation. If we focus on the pipeline itself, so it's not, it's really, as far as the test phase is concerned, it's quite simplistic. Okay, it's got to be able to find and pull down the latest automation tests from some kind of repository or some kind of VCS, right, version control system. It needs to be able to run those tests in the way it's been instructed to do so. What I mean by that is, either a whole set, a subset. There are going to be some run command instructions that it needs to follow to execute, the intention or the range of tests that you want to execute. And then, of course, it's got to push the results of that to a platform, to a reporting platform. All right. Now that, for 90% of people, that's probably going to be enough as far as the testing part of that CI/CD pipeline is concerned. Now, for very, very mature agile organizations, they take that a step further in the sense that if they have a sufficiently clean testing build, maybe a tolerance there, it could be 98% pass, I'm picking arbitrary numbers, or it could be that all the critical tests have passed, but actually some of the lower risk tests have failed, that may not be a problem. But whatever that tolerance is, whatever that threshold is, if that is met, then some extremely agile organizations may use a passing test phase within the build to then allow the onward deployment immediately to production for that release. Okay, so that would be your ultimate kind of agile CI/CD pipeline. Focusing on a testing way of working to make this achievable then, all right, so things you need to think about. You've got to be, again, shifting testing left, right? You've got to be in all of the conversations around requirements and design as testers, okay? We're moving well away from this idea of mini waterfall cycles where we're several weeks behind the requirements and design phase. You've got to be early and upfront there. As we mentioned earlier, we firmly believe that testers should have control over the test environments and how and when and exactly with what they are built, and on what frequency. You've got to have control of that for ownership of the testing process. We talked about the pyramid earlier, okay, but we suggest you have equal focus, on exploratory manual testing and automation tests for your new features in sprint. All right, so fastest feedback says spend 5 minutes proving out this feature by exploring it. Right, what that also gives you is this feature comprehension. Right, so you're probably going to want to explore, particularly a new feature, to just get a working understanding of this new feature, this new part of the application, this new functionality. All right, you can do that very quickly to flush out any obvious deal-breaking issues, but to get your knowledge up to speed as well. And once you've done that, any issues can be raised, they can go straight back to developers, they can be working on fixing that, whilst you then start coding your automation tests or recording your tests, depending on the tool that you're using. All right, but to start with, you've got to have that focus on exploratory as well as kind of a code first mentality. All right. Team makeup and automation tooling has got to be fast and effective for your creation. You're going to need a solid commit, peer review, and a merge process to a central repo there. Okay. And you are going to need a decent test tagging process to ensure you can run the tests that you want to test, right? You're not going to want to run everything all of the time, as we said, okay? And then ultimately you need a rock solid reporting platform, shareable results, so that you can tell people about the process, about the testing, how that's been running. And again, ultimately, if you are looking to take that next step and have your testing cycle be the thing that facilitates to the release to production. Obviously, your reporting thresholds, your pass-fail thresholds, as well as your reporting platform in the run-up to a deployment, so people can see what's gone on, are going to be absolutely paramount to this process. Okay. So we kind of dive a little bit deeper into reporting itself. We talk about these big three things. All right. We talk about reporting, traceability, transparency. Okay. Traceability is about traceability to requirements, right? This is the thing that demonstrates you have sufficient test coverage linked back to requirements. You don't have what we call orphan requirements. You're not releasing something with a requirement that has no associated test with it. All right. And then transparency starts to just shed a little bit more light on, okay, how has this been tested? Coming back to that Amazon checkout flow. Did I just have one automated test that did it as a guest user and did it with a Visa credit card and just put one thing in the checkout basket? Or actually, did I have 25 iterations of that tests that use different users, different payment methods, different products? So transparency is about highlighting the extent of your test coverage. Traceability says, yeah, my requirements met. But transparency says it's met, and also these are the different ways in which I've exercised that functionality, the different ways in which I've tested it. Okay, so I think some good rules for reporting, or looking for a tool, looking for a reporting platform, making sure it's fit for purpose for your agile test automation. Right, we can have the best CICD pipeline, right, and a good set of automated tests, but you don't want your reporting to be an after the event kind of matter of fact bolt on manual exercise. That really defeats the purpose. If you then have to go away and write a manual testing report to account for your test automation, you're really missing the point there probably. We've mentioned context driven a number of times, but this basically says let's have reports that talk about our test coverage and our features that have been tested in a business domain language that makes it very, very obvious to people what we're testing, right? So again, we're moving away from just saying 90% of my tests passed. Okay, well, that tells you what the pass and fail rate was. Gives you no context. It doesn't talk about functionality. It doesn't talk about risk. Ultimately, your reporting has got to allow a product owner or a stakeholder to make a decision on whether or not to release something to production. If you simply say 10% of my tests failed, that's not going to give them the knowledge that they need to make that decision, and it's just going to lead to a raft of more questions to try and get to that thing that they need to know. All right, well, what were the 10% that failed? How critical were they? Did we raise a bug against that? Is it a bug we've already seen before? Is it a new bug? You're gonna have to drill down several more layers to get to that actual information that allows you to make that decision. But if you can get that in your reporting, your automated reporting from the start, makes that process so much smoother, so much quicker. Shareable, yeah, it goes without saying. You as well as many other people are going to need access, continual access to this real-time reporting. Okay, and again, you don't want to wait hours for this. You want a platform that is reporting on the pass and failure of your tests as they're happening, not 5 hours down the line, as they're happening, up to the second, up to the minute reporting. Okay, you're going to want to look at that on desktop. You know, if you're on a train traveling to work, you're going to want to see that on mobile. You might want to send out periodic email reports to show trends over time. These are all things to think about that you may need from your reporting platform. Okay. And yes, it's got to tell people about application quality and risk. It's not about numbers of tests. That's what it's got to do. The value comes from telling people about quality, telling people about whether this is fit for purpose, whether or not it's going to work for the customer if we release it to production. Okay. If you've got a platform that can highlight specific bugs that have already been found before, or gives you the ability to find a failing test and then potentially already to raise that directly from your reporting platform into something like Jira or TestLink, or another bug tracking tool, that's a great feature to have. Okay. And then ultimately, as testers or owners of the tests, what are you going to do when something fails? Okay, because you don't want it continually failing. You need to get to the root cause of that failure. You've got to facilitate troubleshooting through your reporting. It's got to be fast and effective, because again, someone's going to ask you, especially if it's a critical test, why did this test fail? Right? Is it a bug? Is it a performance environment thing? Is it a bad test? They're going to need to get to the bottom of that. So if your reporting gives you all of this up front on a real-time basis, more power to you. And then, as we said, from a transparency point of view, showing iterative use of data for a repeated critical scenario is a great thing, because it gives people significant peace of mind that it's been thoroughly well tested. All right, so we start to look at reports. Ideally, this is kind of a 3-layer reporting process. This is what we see in Test Evolve Halo. So the idea of a snapshot, something you can see and understand very, very quickly, down to a middle layer, which will show you a little bit more about the specifics of the test run itself. It will give you your totals. It will give you your features, your scenarios, your run properties. It may be the place in which you can go back and see run history for the same type of test run. How did it look yesterday, the day before? Something that gives you kind of an analytical viewpoint, some trend information, if you like. I'm just going to take this opportunity quickly just to jump into the Halo platform, just to show you the kind of thing we're talking about here. Okay. So I'll sign into my organization. I'm just going to look at one type of testing we do here. So my snapshot view here, right? This is my functional testing. This is my accessibility testing. This is my lighthouse testing. Okay. So straight away that tells me just the rudimentary stuff, right? This was run on Chrome. It was actually run on a Linux box. It's a desktop breakpoint. 91% passing. Great. That's an invitation just to click in and understand more about the job itself. Okay. Here I start to get more information. I see my fails. I see my trends. I see my run history down here, as we talked about. But actually what I care about in my failing tests, and we can see them here, they're elevated to the top of the pile. I can start to click into these and understand, right, why is this now failing? All right, what's the problem with this? So this is a particular feature. We talked about traceability, right, transparency. So the use of BDD and Cucumber, as I mentioned, that gives us great traceability to source requirements. But purely from a reporting point of view, I can start to see, okay, in this particular scenario, this is an upgrade customer organization to standalone. This is a scenario, it belongs within the partners delete, disassociate logs feature, and I see that the failure was actually in the given step of my BDD scenario, so the when step and the then step didn't run. I've got a stack trace here. I can see some data that was used to run that test, and I've got the ability here to raise a bug straight to Jira if I decide that this is, of course, a bug. All right. Other types of testings we'll talk about, but we have a similar approach for looking at lighthouse auditing, for example, versus specific Axe Core based accessibility testing. All right. So Having a reporting platform that gives you this low-level information, the ability to drill down, the ability to troubleshoot, to share reports, and just make the testing process very, very clear to everybody is probably what you're going to want to be thinking about. Okay. And then we have to think about maintenance. All right, so you've done a great job. You've built out, an increasingly large suite of automated functional regression tests. And it's very easy to get precious about those, okay? But at the end of the day, they've just got to do a job. Tests have got to do a job, right? Fix them or retire them. That should be the mantra, okay? So just, we're going to talk about existing as well as new tests, but for existing tests, okay? After every single build, could be daily, could be weekly, could be twice daily, could be, whatever it is, overnight, you've got to look at those failing tests. You've got to look at your reports. Again, does your report give you everything you need to do this process? But tests will only fail for 3 reasons, okay? They've either found a legitimate bug, all right? You raised an assertion and that assertion failed. Something wasn't present when it should have been, a value was wrong, something was present when it shouldn't have been, kind of positive, negative testing, but it could be a bug. Either that. Number 2, the tests themselves, especially if they're UI tests, may need to be made a bit more resilient. All right, so maybe there are some performance anomalies between different environments, and you have to make sure your tests are resilient to work across all of those environments equally. All right, that may be one outcome of troubleshooting a test. And really, the third thing that they can only be is that you've run a test when actually you shouldn't have done. So that test should have been retired. The feature that it's testing is no longer relevant, it's no longer in the application, and therefore we tried to run the test and of course it failed. So really you can start to categorize your failing tests into one of these 3 areas, okay, when you're troubleshooting them. Now, if they fall into category 2, which is about making tests more resilient, then spend the time to fix these flaky tests, right? If you've deemed that they're high enough risk and you've written them in the first place, then don't continue to tolerate that as a failing test. Address it, fix it, get it up and running so it does its job and it tells you about application quality. All right. If you do have performance issues, then talk to your developers about ensuring that all environments are fit for purpose for test automation. All right, that's the conversation you can and you should have. When we start thinking about new tests, things we mentioned before, shifting testing left, be upfront and early in the discoveries, ensure that your testers, or at least a senior tester or a test manager, are present in the backlog prioritization and also the sprint planning. All right, this is the stuff that stops you falling into this very easy cycle of mini waterfall testing if you're not careful. All right, get yourself a seat at the table for these types of sessions. For anything that's new, take it through that risk scoring process. All right, probability versus impact, low, medium, high. You score something as a 3 times 3, a 9. That says you're going to want to straight away get to automating tests for that and getting a high level of coverage and potentially data iteration. Okay, focus on that before you focus on a 2 or a 3. Take control of the environments. You'll need support to build them and get the process stood up to start with. But once that's in place, make sure you got the access, the permissions that you need so that you are in control of the test environments. Some environments, some more dev-focused environments may build naturally as part of the check-in process, of course, but a general QA environment or a UAT environment should be under your control, so you can associate that with particular tickets in Sprint that are being tested. So, as we say, explore first. Okay, spend 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever needed just to prove out a new feature quickly, just to raise any issues, and then start to build your code. All right, build out your automated tests, because you're going to have to pass that back to a developer anyway, and there'll be a fix and build to the environment if you do find an issue. But only start to build out your code, after you just spend those first few minutes sanity checking it. Okay, and then when it comes to data driving, data iteration, repeating tests, with significant data permutations, just apply a little bit of common sense. This 80-20 rule, okay? If something's not going to add any more value to your view on application quality, if it's not going to tell you something you don't already know, as we say, then don't take the time. Just because you can, don't take the time to add another 3 rows of example data driving repetition. It's really kind of defeating the objective at that stage, and it's just going to add to your run times, of course. Okay. Now, one of the things that people are always interested in is really about getting their biggest return on their investment in their testing team, their tooling, their test automation program. All right, and there are a number of ways you can do that. And here's some of the things that we offer, and we certainly use ourselves. Okay, we tend to talk about kind of non-functional testing as other things you can do or you can accelerate towards with the use of your existing or your newly created automated functional tests. Okay, so it's very, very easy to add in accessibility checks as you traverse through your application, or lighthouse audits on a page-by-page basis, in one or multiple tests. And as we showed you earlier, having that information also right to your test reporting platform. Okay, massive focus, quite rightly, on accessibility right now throughout the US and Europe and the UK. And again, we see an increasing use of tools like Lighthouse as well. We put this in the auditing category, right? So Lighthouse will tell you about SEO, it will tell you about coding best practices, it will tell you about performance, it will tell you about accessibility as well, a scaled back version of accessibility testing, and it will also tell you about progressive web app readiness as well. Visual checks, just as easy, can be just as easy to add into an existing automated functional test. Again, just ways of extending the reuse and using the tests you've built to gain a different quality perspective on your application in ways that maybe weren't important when you were focused on manual testing, or maybe you simply didn't have the time to. But now, with these kinds of tools at your disposal, you really do. Right? You can start to build out different CICD pipelines, running different sets of tests to do. You're not going to want to run every single test that you have with a Lighthouse check in it, but if you do have an e-commerce checkout flow that does the entire user journey from start to finish, then maybe you use that one or two, a small subset of tests with the introduction of Lighthouse checks, audits, to give you an entirely new level of reporting with a different focus. And the same can be said for visual testing. All right. You can use these types of tests for the first time creation of a load testing plan for something like Apache JMeter, or maybe something like Gatling or Locust, potentially, just some performance testing tools that spring to mind. Equally, you can often hook them into security tools like ZAP, that's the Z attack proxy from OWASP. All right, so you can start running your tests and in real time start looking at the requests to the back end, knowing that they are being scanned in real time for any known web app vulnerabilities as well. So again, a completely different perspective, non-functional perspective on application quality. But if you start to introduce all of these, you're getting so much extra value from essentially what was previously just a functional UI or API kind of automated test. Right? You can get significantly more value if you start to branch out into these different areas. And of course, it goes without saying that UI, when you start to run those, maybe with a service like Browser Stack or Source Labs or Cobaton, when you start to run your UI tests on different OS, browser, and maybe device combinations as well, certainly if you've got a web app, your business will have non-functional requirements on browsers that you need to support. And maybe it's just latest, latest -1. Maybe it goes further back than that. Maybe you've got to go back to Chrome 92 or something, who knows. But by using some of these integrations with tools like that, then again, you can get that from your automated tests. All right. And then finally, let's just talk about your team. All right, because this is one of the best investments you can make in your existing team. You've probably already got the people you need. All right, but as we say here, having done this for 20 years, testing can be a thankless task. But what do I mean by that? Well, it's always it's always very often the case. You'll get these questions at some point as a tester. I guarantee you, you've had these questions, right? Why wasn't this tested? Why didn't you find this bug? Okay, you found the bug, but why wasn't it found sooner? And then conversely, ironically, why is testing taking so long? Right? There are times when you can't win, okay? And I'm sure as testers, potentially developers, collaborative teams, you've probably heard these questions from someone at some point, okay? We don't like the term QA. I'll say that now, okay? So QA, quality assurance, all right? Testers alone do not assure quality, all right? They can't make code changes to fix bugs. They can find bugs by good quality testing, all right? So quality belongs to the entire delivery team, okay? Testers test. Again, you're not going to test everything, and you're not going to record every single bug. So the sooner everybody accepts that, the better we'll all be. But you've got to look at how you can add value, right? And we always say a tester's most important job is about fastest feedback on application quality, on any aspect of quality as well. That may be user experience, that may be UI as well, maybe design. It's not just about functional bugs. All right, but again, it's got to be risk-based. People are going to want to know that you've dealt with the most important kind of severity-driven features and functions before anything else. Okay, so yeah, testers can code. All right, shock horror. Absolutely, testers can code. If you pick the right tool, the right framework, the right language, we like to dispel this myth that testers the automation framework has to be written in the same language as what the developers are doing, because there's this kind of underlying assumption that the testers will fail and they will have to depend on their front-end developers to dig them out of an automation hole. That's simply not the case. When you find the right tool, the right language, with the right strategy, the right learning curve, the right team lead, you can make great strides in a short space of time and just unlock the potential of your team of testers that you already have, even with purely a manual background up until this point. All right, you can very quickly change that and unlock kind of new journeys for these people to go on. And then finally, what does this all give you ultimately? Okay, so if you do get this right, you choose the right agile strategy, all right, you're going to end up with increasingly technically capable testers as well, who've both learned to code and they understand the application in a much greater detail, potentially through pairing with a front-end developer, for example. That starts to introduce you to the concept of white box, glass box testing, where you actually get to see inside the guts of the application. You start to understand more about the build, the design of the application, which leads you to design and execute better tests, right? And it gives you a great deal more knowledge of the application in order to troubleshoot your tests as well. So that when you're raising a bug, it's 95% certain that it's going to be a bug, right? You're not speculating at this point. You've got enough knowledge of the application to know, hands down, that is a bug. All right. Certainly, as far as agile aspirations, frequency, consistency, more meaningful testing, valuable cycles of testing. You're going to find these critical bugs. You're going to find them quickly. And you're going to do it in a way that is immediately repeatable. So if that is fixed and deployed to the QA environment, half an hour later, you've got the automation in place just to repeat that quick cycle, that severity-driven subset of automated tests with your real-time reporting platform that tell you straight away whether it's been fixed or not. Again, you may spend 30 seconds exploring that feature, of course, as well, as you should do with a bug fix. But the whole premise of this, it's repeatable and consistent. Okay, you can rely on the outcome, the output from this testing. All right. As a result, your stakeholders will have a much clearer picture of coverage. They're going to have much greater peace of mind, and their job is to say, are we going to release this afternoon or not? We had a critical bug. We need to release. We've made these changes. We've fixed it. We've refactored this and that and the other. But can I release, right? Who can tell me as a product owner whether I can go ahead and release or not? All right, so I want to move away from this concept that testers are somehow gateholders of, to release to production, but their job is to give that quality-based information to the person that will make that decision. All right, and you only have that when you have the coverage and the reporting and the metrics to tell you that. All right, and then we always make the point coming back to the automation pyramid. Okay, automation at scale, when you get this right, you get the time for your humans, your testers, and this will be your best return on your testers, is when they can focus on exploratory edge case testing, asking questions, doing stupid things, probing, seeing if the application fails gracefully, stressing it in ways that maybe people didn't design it to be stressed. All right, you can only do that, you have the luxury of doing that only once you've got a rock solid kind of underpinning secure automation layer. All right, so you can become quality leaders, all right, in all these different areas. All right, so let's look at these hashtags, these terms, things you're looking to achieve with this framework. All right, this approach. You're going to be fast, effective, consistent, repeatable, risk driven, with a high return. Okay, thank you for listening. Thanks for taking your time. I hope this has been useful. So this has just been a bit of an insight into how you can start to embrace agile testing automation and what a strategy might look like for your organization. All right, and a list of things to consider. Plenty of other research to go off and dig into, I'm sure, particularly around CICD pipelines probably. But yeah, if you like this, please give us a thumbs up, or maybe subscribe to the channel. Why not come and visit us at testevolve.com, or come and look through some of our documentation on GitHub. As always, we do currently offer a 90-day evaluation for our entire automation platform, with support for Ruby, JavaScript, TypeScript by way of languages, accessibility testing, visual testing, cross-browser, cross-device testing with the use of BDD, Cucumber, the TestEvolve Halo reporting platform that we showed you. So if you fancy giving that a go as maybe part of your automation strategy, then come and enjoy it on us for 90 days. But thank you very much, and we'll speak soon.